Well, we have good news today. Jesus is alive and he has conquered the grave. And on this Resurrection Sunday, we begin a new series of messages where we will be talking about the person of Jesus Christ. A lot of people think about Jesus, but we know that he is the central figure of the Christian faith, and more than that, he is the most influential person who has ever walked the face of the earth, and even skeptics will concede that point. And many people are more than willing to kind of shape Jesus into who they think that he is, or who honestly they want him to be. For example, there are people today who say that Jesus is always loving and affirming, and that Jesus would never be confrontational or judgmental. He would never demand that people turn from their sin and walk in holiness. He would never do that. And yet that's a false Jesus. There are others who paint Jesus as the preeminent social justice warrior who came to make a more just society, and he did that by challenging and tearing down systems of oppression, and that is a false Jesus. Now, it is true that Jesus embraced people who were far from God. It is true that Jesus spoke and condemned and challenged people who abused their power, but Jesus goes far, far beyond that. And we have our caricatures of who Jesus is in our own mind, and we try to make him into something that we want him to be, or that we think that he should be. And the truth of the matter is that Jesus is who he is. And in this series, we're going to be letting Jesus speak for himself. In the Gospel of John, on no less than 7 occasions, Jesus uses the phrase, "I am," to define who he is. And so we're going to be looking at these 7 I am statements of Jesus in his own words to say, this is who I am. And we will worship and follow Jesus as he is defined himself for us. And today we come to an occasion in the Gospel of John in chapter 11 where Jesus is interacting with a family that he loves very dearly. He's very close with them. He's stayed with them on a number of occasions. He's almost like a family member himself. And I'm speaking of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And what happens, this whole event takes place about 2 weeks before Jesus' own crucifixion and his own resurrection. And what happens is that Lazarus gets sick. I don't know, maybe he gets a fever or coughs up a little blood, finds a lump. And he does what many of us would do when something like that happens. He goes to a doctor to see what's going on, what can I do to get better? And apparently, the doctors that he went to had nothing for him. There's nothing they can do. But Mary and Martha and Lazarus, they know Jesus is a healer. He has healed people. They've seen it with their own eyes. And so they send word to Jesus that Lazarus is sick. Now, Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived in Bethany, which is kind of a little suburb of Jerusalem down in Judea. And this is what the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verse 3 says. So the sisters, Mary and Martha, sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." They didn't need to tell Jesus who it was. He knew Lazarus. They were very, very close. And then it says in verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. What? That's not what you do. When someone that you love and you care deeply about is in trouble and they send word to you that they need your help, what do? Yeah, you go help them. You drop what you're doing and you go help them. You know what, if you were to call me and I'm a friend of your family and you're like, hey, something drastic has happened, we've had an emergency, we need your help, we need you here. And I'm like, yeah, after my golf trip, I'll swing by. You wouldn't feel so loved. And so Jesus stays where he is. He's outside of Jerusalem. He's outside of Judea. He's not in the area. He stays where he is 2 more days. And then it says in verse 7, after those 2 days, after this, he said to the disciples, let's go to Judea again. All right, now it's time. We've heard word. We could have left a couple days ago, but Now I think it's a good time to go. Rabbi, verse 8, the disciples told him, just now, in other words, just recently, the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going there again? Like, hey, hang on a second, Jesus. The reason why we're not in Judea, the reason why we're not in Jerusalem right now is because just a few days ago, they were trying to kill you. There's a bounty out on your head. And, oh, by the way, we've been kind of seen with you, and so if we go down there, it's not a good idea. And apparently this debate goes back and forth, as we'll see in just a few minutes, where they're trying to dissuade Jesus of doing something they don't think that he should do. And there are many times in the Gospels where Jesus says something or does something that the disciples don't agree with, and they try to correct Jesus. Don't say that or don't do that. This is one of those occasions. Like, whoa, time out. Let's not do that. We don't have to go to Jerusalem. We don't have to go down into the lion's den. And Jesus says in verse 11, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up. Then the disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll get well. We don't need to go to Jerusalem. We don't need to go to Bethany. Like, we're glad that you got all that cleared up. Now what's on the agenda? They don't want to go, and they don't want him to go. And Jesus says in verse 13, Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. And so, verse 14, Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, fellas. Lazarus is dead. Sometimes in that day, they would talk about someone who has passed away as they've fallen asleep. And so Jesus just comes right out and says, no, he's gone. He's gone. And then Jesus, he says something that is really insensitive. It's really kind of uncalled for. You ever been around somebody who was insensitive and they said something that was uncalled for? Here we go. And then Jesus says in verse 15, and I am glad for you. Yeah, I'm glad Lazarus died. I'm glad for you that I wasn't there so that you may believe. But let's go to him. Like, Lazarus. We've hung out with Lazarus. We're good friends with Lazarus. And I'm glad that he's dead. And I'm glad that he's dead for you, for your sake. Now, if you're a disciple of Jesus, if you're hearing him, you're scratching your head thinking, this is not, Jesus, this is not okay. You know what the reality is? That the reality is that sometimes bad circumstances in and around us are meant, from God's perspective, for our benefit. And we think, no, that couldn't be true. And sometimes God allows things to happen to wake us up, to snap us out of it, to clue us in on something deeper or more profound that he wants us to grasp. Maybe you've been there. Maybe something's happened in your life that all of a sudden it's kind of like a smelling salt. You snap to, you're like, wow, this is one of those occasions for the disciples. But there's still a debate on whether or not they should go to Jerusalem. And apparently it kind of raged on this whole time. And it must have been that there were some of the disciples that said, Jesus, we really think this is a bad idea to go to Jerusalem. Like, you don't have to go to Jerusalem. In fact, we know that if Lazarus is sick, like, we've seen you heal people from a distance. Like, you don't have to show up there. You can just say, be well, and he'll be made well. So we don't have to do that. But if you want to go there, if we can't dissuade you, that's fine. We're just going to hang back here. You say, James, how do you know that's maybe what's going on? Well, it's because of one of the disciples. He spoke up. His name is Thomas. You know what we call Thomas, right? Doubting Thomas. So Doubting Thomas speaks up. This is what he says. They didn't call him Doubting Thomas. They had another nickname for him. Then Thomas, called Twin. That was his nickname, Twin. Then Thomas, called Twin, said to his fellow disciples, he rebukes them, let's go too so that we may die with Jesus. Now, what's he doing? He realizes something that I think we all need to realize. Everyone's getting ready to back out on Jesus, and he's like, whoa, hey fellas, We follow Jesus, and it's been really easy, but here's the thing. Following Jesus is not always easy or safe. Sometimes it costs us. Sometimes it puts us in peril. Sometimes it's something that's like, you know what? I may lose my job over this. This may cost me. This may change things for me. And in some way, Thomas kind of fills the room, and he's like, this is not all right. Are we gonna follow Jesus when it's good and everything? You know, he's a rock star and all that, and we're gonna say now that it's a little dangerous and now it's a little tentative, that we're gonna hang back and go just, no. Here's the thing. If Jesus is going, we're going. And if Jesus dies, then I guess we're gonna die with him, but we're not gonna flake out on Jesus now. I think that's something that our culture needs. You know, in Western culture, we've got it kind of easy. And a lot of people follow Jesus because Jesus, solves their problems and answers their prayer and, make sure that they get another paycheck in the mail. And we follow Jesus because of what he does for us. But when things get a little bit rocky, when people look at us and call us names, we're like, you know what? I think I'll just let Jesus go do his thing. And we need a lot more Thomases that stand up and say, no. We're not flaking out on Jesus now. If it costs us something to follow Jesus, then then so be it. And if it's hard to follow Jesus, then so be it. We're not flaking out. And so I think we should stop calling Thomas Doubting Thomas. I think his name should be more like Thomas the Courageous. We need more Thomases to follow Jesus. And so Jesus and the disciples, they'd head out towards Bethany to see Mary and Martha, and Lazarus is now dead. And Martha gets word, apparently somebody sends word that Jesus is on his way, and so she runs out of Bethany to meet up with Jesus. And when she gets to Jesus, she says to him something that we probably in one way or another have said to Jesus or to God ourselves. She says in verse 21, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. If only you'd shown up, Jesus. It's the if only, and you've said if only many times in your life, just like I've said if only. If only I'd not taken that phone call, if only I'd not shown up, if only I'd apologized and said that I love them, if only I'd have done these things. And maybe Martha is thinking this. Maybe she's thinking, you know what? If only I hadn't sent a messenger, if only I had gone personally to Jesus, then he would have realized what desperate situation it was and that he would have come. But maybe because I sent someone else, he didn't get the message quite clear enough. And if only I had gone, and if only he could have come back, things would be different. And what Martha didn't realize is that it wasn't about what she did or didn't do. Jesus made a decision. She didn't need to beat herself up. She didn't need to think, oh, if only I'd have done something different, I could have stopped this. Lord, if only you'd been here. And then she says something, because basically she's saying, he's dead because of you. God, I'm in this situation because of you. You didn't answer my prayer. You didn't come through like like you should have. Then she kind of realizes that she maybe have crossed the line. She says in verse 22, yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, he will give to you. And she's not thinking that Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. That's not what she's thinking. If you've known the story, you know that, but that's not what she's thinking. And she doesn't think that's going to happen at all. We'll find that out here in just a second. She's not thinking resurrection at all. She's just trying to back up and say, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And then Jesus, he does another insensitive thing. He says another insensitive thing. Verse 23, your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. Because that's not something that you say to somebody. Her heart is breaking into a million pieces, and Jesus says, you know he's going to rise again. So it's a platitude. It's meant to, I don't know what else to say, so I'm going to say something that, hopefully make you feel better. Like you're at a funeral, you walk by the casket, you're looking at somebody and their loved one standing right there, and you look, they look so good. No, they don't. They're dead. No one looks good when they're dead. Or how about this? They're in a better place. Maybe, but my heart is breaking in a million pieces. That doesn't help me right now. Like, I'd rather you just not say anything than say something stupid like that. Jesus, what are you talking about? He's going to rise again. And Martha says, verse 24, Martha said, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last stage. I know. I've heard all of this before. I know this. I know. That's not helping right now. Right. I get it. I understand. But that's not any use to me. If anybody ever said something to you trying to be helpful, but it was utterly not helpful. And Martha respects Jesus so much, she honors him so much that she's like, I know, but it still hurts. And I'm still disappointed, and I still can't believe that you didn't show up because we just knew you were going to be there. We just knew. And you waited, and he's dead. And one day, on the last day, which basically means when I'm going to be long gone before the last, didn't help. And then Jesus makes one of the most astonishing statements that anyone has ever made. And kind of an uncalled for statement in the moment. Verse 25, he says this, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? What a crazy thing to say. What an insensitive thing to say. It's just like, who says that? Martha's not expecting him to say that. It's like, oh my gosh, are you seriously? Seriously. It's as if you had called me because we're close friends and someone in your family is sick and they're dying, and you're thinking, hey, maybe if the pastor shows up, he'll pray and God will listen to him. He's not listening to our prayers, but maybe something will change. But whatever it is, James, you're close. We need you here, and then I don't come. The person dies, and then you're like, where were you when we needed you? Seriously, where were you? Why did you wait? Why did you go on your golf vacation when we needed you? And if I were to look to you and say, don't worry, I'm the resurrection and the life. Anybody who dies, even if he dies, he's going to live. Do you believe this? You know what you do? You grab your cell phone, call 911, and ask them to send the paddy wagon for me. Send the guys with the white coats. This guy needs, no one says that kind of thing, especially in a moment where someone's heart is breaking into a million pieces, trying to give them false hope. No religious leader, no one has ever said this. Not Buddha, not Muhammad, not Confucius. Nobody has ever said this. Jesus did. Jesus did. And I think Jesus is still asking us this question today. Do you believe this? Jesus is saying, do you believe this? What? That I am the resurrection and the life. And he looks at Martha. Mary's not there. Martha goes and sends for Mary. She doesn't know that Jesus has come. Martha had word and she went out. And so when Mary finds out, Mary's been she's been waiting for Jesus. She sends words, but as she's went off to send for Mary, Martha says, and she's trying to be polite. Verse 27, she's trying to be polite to Jesus. Yes, Lord, she's told him, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God who comes into the world. Yes, I believe you're special. She didn't say, yes, I believe that you're the resurrection and the life. She's being nice to him. You're special. I get that. That's why I haven't slapped you right now. So she sends off for Mary. Mary, she's been in isolation. She's been kind of sequestered because she's in grief. She's in mourning. And when Mary gets to Jesus, she does the same exact thing that Martha did. She falls at Jesus' feet and she says, Lord, if you had been here, our brother wouldn't have died. They're thinking the same thing. God, seriously. And when she comes, there's other people coming with her. And it says in verse 33, when Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews, the people who came with her crying, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. You've had this experience, haven't you? Where you're around someone who's grieving deeply and they're crying and they're mourning, and you can tell they're shattered into a million pieces, and all of a sudden what happens to you? A lump hits your throat, your eyes well up in tears. That's what happens with Jesus. See, Jesus is fully human, and he experiences emotion with us. And when our heart's broken into a million pieces, his heart breaks into a million pieces also. He was deeply moved and troubled in his spirit. He recognized the deep anguish and the grief. And then this astonishing statement, verse 35, it just simply states, Jesus wept. This is not a, tears started streaming down his cheeks. The word here is a very strong kind of word. It's the kind of word where there's convulsion and there's snot involved and there's just this heaving. It's a train wreck kind of weeping. And Jesus loses it. And that verse is perplexing to me. It always has been, because Jesus knows what's getting ready to happen. He has gone there. He waited for Lazarus to die for a reason. He knows that he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and yet when he sees the grief, he cries and he loses it. When he knew in like 30, 45 minutes, he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead when he gets to the tomb, and there's going to be there's going to be like, whoa, amazing, there's going to be a party. He knows that's getting ready to happen, and yet, even though he knows that's going to happen, he still weeps. In fact, a few days later, he would be going up to Jerusalem, and he would stop on the overlook of Jerusalem, and he would look out across the city, and he wept. The scripture says he wept over the city because they were so far from God, and they were rejecting him, and he was weeping for their rejection. And let me tell you something. If you're rejecting Jesus today, he weeps over you. And so Jesus wept. He's still not at the grave, so they take him to the grave, and when he gets to the grave, it's a cave and a rock cliff, and it's I don't know how big the opening was, but it's a cave. You can go in, and what they would do is they would bury people, and they would cut out a stone, kind of looks like a wheel, and they would, in front of the cave, they would put like a trench, like a downward trench, and then at the downward trench there would be this notch so that they could roll the stone in front of it, and when it would fall down in there, no one could get it out. It would seal the tomb. And so Jesus comes up to the grave, and the whole entourage all the disciples are there, Mary and Martha are there, all the people who were mourning over the death of Lazarus, and they're thinking, okay, well, Jesus is going to go to the grave, and he's going to mourn at the grave. I mean, he's mourning, he's weeping here. He's going to go to the grave, and he's going to weep over the loss of Lazarus, just like you and I would go to a grave of a loved one and reminisce there and grieve at the gravesite. And that's what they think is happening. And then Jesus, he walks up, and everybody's there thinking, this is a solemn moment. And Jesus says in verse 39, remove the stone. Excuse me? Yeah, remove the stone. I mean, I'm going with you to the graveside of your loved one. We get out there, and I'm like, dig him up. No one says this. No one does that. What do you mean, dig him up? Yeah, dig him up. Remove the stone, Jesus says. And then Martha, bless her heart, her last name could be Stewart. She's so proper. Then Martha, the dead man's sister, you ever notice how people, once they die, people stop using their name? Even John, Martha, Lazarus' sister, the dead man's sister. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, Lord, there's already a stench. He's been in there for 4 days. He's been dead for 4 days. Like, I don't know if it's a dig at Jesus, like, you could have come earlier and we wouldn't be going through this, but he's been in there we buried him 4 days ago. And the 4-day thing was not just a little like, hello, there was a folklore. There was this, sometimes people believe that the soul stayed with the body for 3 days, and on the 4th day it departed. And she's like, we're way beyond the pale here. Like, he's not just dead, he's gone, like, it's like, and the King James said he stinketh. Like, this is not good. Like, it's sealed to keep the smell out. Roll the stone away. And then Jesus, again, insensitively, in front of everybody, said to her, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? It's kind of a harsh thing to say in the moment, don't you think? Like, he's breaking all the protocol. You don't do this, and then you're like, no, seriously, didn't I tell you? He rebukes her. So, verse 41, they removed the stone. I don't know who volunteered for that job. But apparently, some guys got down there and like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And they put their shoulder to this rock, this stone, and they start to, Jewish people, they didn't go around graves. They stayed clear of graves. It wasn't something that you did. But they get this stone up and rolled out of the trench. Then they back up and they're thinking, why are we here? What are we doing this for? And then in verse 43, or verse 41, it goes on, it says, then Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you heard me. You hear me. And so he's praying out loud in front of everybody. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said it so that they may believe that you sent me. In other words, hey, God, I've been praying about this moment for a long time. They don't realize it, but I've been praying. I haven't been doing anything. I stayed back where I was for a couple days, and I was praying the whole time, and I know that you've heard me. And in this moment, I just want everyone around here to understand what's getting ready to happen. I want them to connect the dots. So he's talking to God out loud, and everybody's like, what's he doing? The grave is open. And then he gets done with the prayer. Verse 43, after he said this, he shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! I wish I could have been there. Jesus is losing it. If you're one of the family members, if you're one of the mourners there, you're thinking, he's lost it. So we've got an open grave. Jesus says, dig him up. And then he says, Lazarus, come out. And everybody's, they're looking. And then all of a sudden, they hear some shuffling around inside the grave. Some thumping. Now, if I'm at your loved one's graveside and I said, dig him up, and you were dumb enough to dig him up, and then I said, Joe, come out, and all of a sudden the coffin lid started to creak open and the hands started, you know what you'd do? You'd be like, I'm out of here. Bam. I don't know what's going on, but somebody can tell me about it. I'm gone. Verse 44, The dead man came out, bound hand and foot with linen strips and with his face wrapped in a cloth. He looks like a mummy. He can't see. He's been dead for 4 days. They wrapped him up tight. He looks like a mummy, which is why he's hopping out of the grave. And I don't know, maybe it's a little thing, and he's banging up against the thing, trying to get out, and it hits his head and comes out, and he's standing there. And everybody else is standing there. And I'm telling you, I promise you that when Lazarus comes out, he's coming out, everybody else is backing up. You would, I would, we all would. And Jesus is just there. And then it says, as everybody's just like, what are we looking at? Then Jesus said, unwrap him and let him go. Duh. And I love this, that Jesus in this moment does only what Jesus can do, and then he asks everybody else to help. Like, there are certain things that only Jesus can do in your life, and when he does them, it doesn't mean that we don't need anybody else. It still means that we need community. It still means that we need our help of our brothers and sisters. We're never okay on our own, even if Jesus moves in a wonderful way in our life. Jesus does the hard part, and then he says, he still needs help. Unwrap him. Unwrap him. And so a couple of brave souls go and unwrap the dead guy. I mean, the formerly dead guy. What's the point? What's the bottom line? Jesus is the author of life, and he has inherent power over death. That's the point. I'm surprised, when it's important that Jesus said, Lazarus, come out. Because if he just said, come out, a whole bunch of people would come out of the graves, Like, no, not you, no, just him. Lazarus, come out. Because Jesus is the author of life. And he has inherent power over death. And John does not record the celebration that happened after Lazarus' resurrection, I think because it's not the real resurrection. It's not the ultimate resurrection. Like, it's one thing to be resurrected when someone's saying, I'm going to resurrect you, come out. It's another thing for you to resurrect yourself with no one standing out of your grave. So just a few days later, Jesus was dead, buried in a tomb, and he didn't need somebody on the outside of the grave to say, come out. He just got up. And the stone was rolled away. You know why the stone was rolled away from Jesus' tomb? It wasn't so that he could get out, because Jesus had a resurrected body. We have examples of him eating physically after the resurrection, but passing through walls. Jesus didn't need the stone to be rolled away to get out. The stone needed to be rolled away so that people could see in that he wasn't there. A few days later, Jesus would say this nonsensical thing. In John 14:19, he would say, because I live, you also will live. Again, who says that? The author of life says that. Who has inherent power over death says that. That's who. This is a hollow and empty statement if Jesus doesn't come back from the dead. It means nothing. He's a madman. He's a crazy loon. That's who he is. And if Jesus doesn't come back from the dead, none of us should be here, quite honestly. In fact, the reason that you're here today is not because Jesus was a good teacher. It's not because he did some nice things. It wasn't because he was like a rock star in his day. It is because he died, was crucified by Rome. They threw his body in a tomb to rot away like every other body has ever rotted away. And 3 days later, on his own, he came out of the grave. That's why you're here today. You're not here because we want warm and fuzzies. We are here today. The church exists today. Christianity exists today in this world because someone died and came back to life on their own power and by their own will. Well, how can you prove it? I'm looking at it. And there are 1 billion plus 2 billion, maybe 3 billion people today finally gathering once again, celebrating the resurrection of the one who defeated the grave. Again, if that doesn't happen, nobody goes to their own grave saying, yeah, it was all a hoax, don't worry. No, it didn't happen. The reason why Christianity started off and people started becoming followers of Jesus was not because he was a good teacher. It wasn't. Because he said loony things like, hey, I'm the resurrection and life. No, you're not. Your body's still in the grave. You rotted away. No. 500 people saw him at the same time. Disciples saw him. Everybody. That's why we're here today. I don't know if you realize that or not, but the reason why you showed up today, the reason why you're watching online right now is because a dead man came back to life. His name was Jesus. And he says to you, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? That's the question that he still asks today. It is the most important question. Because maybe you're like, oh yeah, absolutely. That's why I was cheering and hollering and hooting a couple minutes ago. Because I believe it. And some of you are here like, you know what? I'm nibbling around the edges. This whole coming out of the dead thing, I don't know if I buy that or not. I think Jesus was good. I got questions. And let me tell you something. If you have those questions, you need to press into those questions. If you have those doubts, and all of us have doubts from time, I still have doubts from time to time about a lot of different things. I don't want to tell you what they are. I don't want to scare you. But if you still have doubts, you need to press in on those things. And we've created an environment just for you. It's called Starting Point. Next time it happens, you need to be a part of that and ask your questions and explore those doubts and say, you know what? I don't know. I got to figure this out. I'm just telling you. I'm telling you. The death rate is 1,000%. And when your day comes, it may come this week, may come 10 years from now, may come 50 years from now, I don't know. When your day comes, you're going to need a king who has defeated the grave. And when he comes again, he can say, come out. That's my king. That's my king. Is he yours? And you got to make that decision. When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, the one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live, he asked Martha, do you believe this? In other words, it's not just a statement, it's a statement that's designed to create a response. It demands a response. Yes or no? Yes or no? Do you believe this? Jesus didn't come to make your life better. I'm sorry to tell you that. He came to save you. He came to conquer death and the grave and offer you the opportunity to be with God forever and ever and ever. In the presence of God, we call that eternal life. And those who don't believe this, those who don't respond to Jesus will be separated from God for all of eternity. We call that spiritual death, eternal death. Not popular, it's the truth. So don't try to form Jesus into who you think he ought to be, or this is who he is. And he's saying, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? And maybe, I'm just telling you, The reason why the church began, the reason why everybody just went all in with Jesus, the reason why Thomas was like, you know what, I'm not going to believe until I see, because I believe, but I want to see it for my own eyes. And Thomas believed, and they went all in, and they all went to their death proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus. All of them. And thousands of them did. And tens of thousands of them did. That's why we're here today. And we've got it easy. We got it easy. We got it easy. But I'm just telling you, following Jesus is not easy. But Jesus said, regardless of what happens to you, I don't care what kind of disease goes around. I don't care what happens with your job. I don't care. I am the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in me, even though he dies, will live. Do you believe this? At the end, at the ascension, Jesus looks at his disciples and says, he who believes and is baptized will be saved. He who does not believe, it begins with belief. He who does not believe will be condemned. Yep, Jesus said it. It's politically incorrect, it's offensive, but it's true. So you have a decision to make. Do you believe or not? And if you do believe, then as Jesus said, then you need to be baptized. I mean, plain and simple. Like, well, I'll get around to it someday. No. It's a decision that you need to own. Jesus came to save you from your sin. That's why he came. He did a lot of other things, but I'm just telling you, that's why he came. That, my friend, is the gospel. Don't try to add other things to the gospel. That's the gospel. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, even though he dies, yet will he live. Let's pray. God, there's a lot of things in our culture and some in our minds about who Jesus is and what he came to do. And Father, I'm just grateful that he said some of the most audacious things anyone has ever said. And then he punctuated every statement with a resurrection of his own. And that we don't need to fear death, that we don't need to fear the grave, we don't need to fear what's on the other side of this life, that you have come to say, oh yeah, it's all true. The resurrection, what Martha said at the end of the day, everybody, yeah, that's all true. And I'm coming back. I'm coming back for those who believe in me, to raise them, to take them to be with me for eternity. God, we're just thank you for that good news. That's what the gospel means, good news. That is the best news any of us could ever hear. And Father, I'm grateful today that billions of people across this planet in one voice are praising and worshiping a risen Savior. His name is Jesus, and he died for all of us, and he raised for all of us so that we could be redeemed and spend eternity with you. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.